You watch Mark Grayson take a punch that would level a building, shake it off, and keep fighting. You watch Omni-Man barrel through a subway train at full speed without a scratch, while everyone inside turns to red mist. And at some point, you have to ask, what exactly are these guys made of? The answer is more interesting than you'd expect. So today we are breaking down the incredible anatomy of Invincible and Omni-Man. Everything about Viltrumite biology starts with one concept from the official Invincible Universe Handbook. Smart atoms. Viltrumite cells are made of atoms that can change their properties. These atoms can be mentally adjusted by the Viltrumite themselves to produce specific physical effects. Speed, density, durability, the ability to survive in a vacuum, flight, all of it comes from this one biological feature. The smart atom structure is what separates a Viltrumite body from a human body at the most basic level, and it's what makes comparing the two almost pointless. Think about that. The human body is fixed. You can train it, push it, get it in better shape, but the underlying biology doesn't change. A Viltrumite body is responsive at the atomic level. It adjusts, it rebuilds. When Mark gets pushed past his limits in a fight, his body reads that stress and upgrades to match it. The cells repair themselves after damage and come back running at a higher level than before. This is the biological basis for reactive adaptation, the mechanism that explains why Viltrumites get stronger through combat rather than just recovering from it. Every serious injury, every fight that pushes them to the edge results in a measurably stronger body afterward. In the show, by the time season 3 opens, Mark's training and combat history over the previous 90 days had increased his speed by 65%, his endurance by 70%, and his strength by 138%. Those numbers come directly from GDA monitoring. His body responded to accumulated stress by rebuilding at a higher level every time. Viltrumite senses also develop as part of this. While their senses aren't supernatural in the way some comic book characters experience, they're sharper than most other humanoid species. Mark starts noticing this as his Viltrumite genetics become more dominant over time. He can hear conversations from significant distances. His vision improves. His ability to read and react to things during a fight gets faster. None of this is separate from the smart atom biology. Everything connects back to the same underlying system of cellular intelligence. Omni-Man has had this running at full development for over 2,000 years. Viltrumite's strength has no documented upper limit. The official position from both the comics and the show is that Viltrumites grow stronger the older they get, and there's no established point at which that growth stops. Given enough time and enough combat, a Viltrumite keeps scaling indefinitely. What does this mean in practice? The gap between where Omni-Man is and where Mark is at the start of the series goes far beyond raw numbers. It's centuries of reactive adaptation that Mark hasn't lived through yet. Nolan has been fighting, surviving, and rebuilding since before most of Earth's recorded history. Every battle that nearly killed him made the next version of him harder to kill. Mark, at 17, was at the very beginning of that process. The show demonstrates this gap clearly and deliberately. Mark's first few seasons involve him getting beaten badly by experienced Viltrumites with centuries of adaptation behind them. Anissa beats him in season 2. Conquest nearly kills him twice. Nolan himself beat him to the point of unconsciousness without working particularly hard. This isn't Mark being weak in an absolute sense. It's Mark being young by Viltrumite standards, and the show is consistent about what that means. The Guardians of the Globe couldn't stop Nolan. Cecil threw everything the GDA had at Nolan during a later confrontation and barely slowed him down. These moments tell you where a seasoned adult Viltrumite sits relative to anything Earth can currently put in front of them. And Nolan in that season isn't even the strongest Viltrumite alive. Thrag is. The scale keeps going up. Yes, by the end of the comics, Mark fights Thrag directly inside a functioning star and wins. That's the payoff for the path the show has been building since episode 1. The reason Viltrumite skin can survive impacts that destroy everything around them comes from the smart atom structure. Stronger atomic bonds throughout the body create a density and toughness that conventional weapons can't break through. Nuclear explosions register as serious but survivable events. Volcanic heat is an inconvenience. The vacuum of space causes no damage as long as a Viltrumite can hold their breath. In Season 1, Cecil runs a test on Nolan using the hammer, an orbital laser weapon the GDA had developed as a deterrent against major threats. Nolan takes the full beam and walks away with minor bruising. That's the baseline durability of a healthy adult Viltrumite with thousands of years of adaptive biology behind them. The GDA's most powerful weapon registers as roughly equivalent to a strong punch. For comparison, the Immortal, one of Earth's most powerful heroes, gets killed by Nolan in seconds. War Woman, whose strength is genuinely extraordinary by any human superhero standard, goes down in moments. The entire Guardians roster combined couldn't stop him. This is what makes the visual of Nolan shrugging off the hammer so effective. The GDA threw their best shot and found out it wasn't close. Mark's durability at 17 is substantially lower than Nolan's, though still far beyond human capacity. He can take hits that would kill most heroes outright, but he bleeds, he breaks bones, and he needs significant recovery time after major fights. By the time he reaches full Viltrumite maturity, his ability to absorb damage will be dramatically higher than where he starts. The show tracks this carefully and uses it to give each fight a different feeling depending on where Mark is in his development. It's also worth understanding what durability covers and what it leaves open. Viltrumite skin is extraordinarily resistant. Their insides are considerably more vulnerable. A bomb going off inside a Viltrumite's body can kill them. Extreme prolonged heat, specifically the plasma of a functioning star, will eventually break down the atomic bonds and wear down even the most powerful healing. The durability has limits. The challenge is getting past the outside to reach them. Flight for Viltrumites is a mechanical process rooted in 3 separate biological systems working together. The first is the inner ear equilibrium system. Viltrumites have a highly specialized balancing organ in their inner ear that lets them orient themselves in full 3-dimensional space at speed. This is what makes flight feel natural rather than disorienting, even at the speeds they move. The second is their ability to interact with gravity directly. Viltrumite biology lets them push against or pull toward gravitational fields to generate movement in any direction. This is what allows flight in the vacuum of space where there's no air to push against. The third is the smart atom inertia system. By mentally directing their atoms to build momentum in a specific direction, Viltrumites can accelerate to extreme speeds without any external help. This is why a Viltrumite flying at full speed generates enough force on impact to cause massive damage to whatever they hit. In practical terms, this means a Viltrumite in flight is a weapon in every direction. Nolan, using his body as a projectile to level an entire city in the Flaxen dimension, isn't him using a special attack, it's just him flying fast enough that the physics do the rest. The same principle is why Mark throwing objects at speed can send them across continents. Nolan's early training instruction to Mark is telling. He tells him to push against the air. That framing points at the equilibrium and inertia systems. Flight for Viltrumites is learned in the way running is learned, through understanding the mechanism and building the body's response to it. Viltrumites can hold their breath for up to 2 weeks. This single biological feature is what makes makes traveling between planets possible without a spacesuit. The enhanced lung capacity lets a Viltrumite seal off their breathing system, store oxygen at an efficient rate, and survive in the vacuum of space for an extended period while using their gravity interaction and inertia systems to travel. The immune system handles the pressure difference and temperature extremes. The smart atom structure handles radiation. This is why Nolan can fly from Earth to Thraxa and back without any equipment. This is why Mark can be thrown into orbit during a fight and come back under his own power. And this is why the Viltrumites can operate as an interstellar conquering force without depending on technology for basic survival. The biology covers everything a spacesuit would normally provide, and it does it more reliably than any equipment could. The GDA figures out early in the show that fighting Viltrumites in Earth's atmosphere gives humans essentially no advantage based on the environment. Viltrumites function the same way at the bottom of the ocean, in the upper atmosphere, or in open space. There's no terrain that hurts them more than another. Every location is equally comfortable for them and potentially dangerous for anything fighting alongside them. This also creates a real problem for any group trying to oppose them. You can't isolate them using the environment. You can't use terrain to even the odds. The fight happens on their terms biologically no matter where it takes place. The only real advantages come from the specific weaknesses the show documents, which we'll get to in a moment. Viltrumite healing is fast and thorough, but comes with specific hard limits the show depicts accurately. The general healing rate for standard injuries is fast by any human measure. Broken bones, torn muscle, organ damage, all of these heal within days to weeks, depending on severity. Mark spends a couple of months recovering from the Conquest rematch in Season 4, which tells you how serious that level of damage actually was. His organs were outside his body during that fight, and the limits matter. Viltrumites can't grow back lost limbs. Conquest's cybernetic arm exists because the attack that cost him the original one was permanent. Damage to the heart specifically slows down the healing because the heart's function is tied to the blood flow that drives cellular repair. Internal trauma in general bypasses the external toughness and can cause damage that heals much more slowly. Extreme heat is a different situation entirely. The healing can manage most physical trauma by repairing cells faster than the damage builds up. Like, star-level plasma does something different. It breaks apart the atomic bonds that give the smart atom structure its properties, which means the underlying biology gets compromised at a level the healing can't keep up with. Mark and Thrag both survive inside the sun in the comics, but extended exposure is lethal, even for the most powerful Viltrumites. Viltrumites age. They just do it at a rate so slow that for practical purposes, a Viltrumite who looks like they're in their mid-40s might be hundreds or thousands of years old by calendar time. The biological mechanism is that the older a Viltrumite gets, the more slowly the aging process moves. Nolan looks like a man in his mid-40s and is over 2,000 years old. The show confirms that this slowdown continues without any known stopping point. What this creates for Mark is a specific kind of weight that the show takes seriously. His mother will grow old and die while he barely changes. His friends will have full lifetimes. People he forms deep bonds with will cycle through decades of aging while Mark sits somewhere in his early development by Viltrumite standards. Nolan told Mark this during the Chicago fight, framing it as a reason to abandon Earth and align with the Empire. From Nolan's perspective, getting attached to people who won't live very long by his measure is something that will cause Mark nothing but pain across the centuries. Mark's response to that argument, and his ongoing response across 4 seasons, is the emotional core of his character. He knows Nolan is biologically correct. He's going to outlive everyone he loves. He chooses them anyway. The show treats this as a real sacrifice rather than an easy heroic choice. The aging mechanism also connects directly to the power growth curve. Because Viltrumites are still physically developing during their early centuries, a young Viltrumite is dramatically weaker than one who has lived for 100 years or more. Mark's powers showed up at 17. By Viltrumite developmental standards, he's barely started. The combat gap between him and Nolan in season 1 goes beyond experience. It's the difference between where Mark is in his biological development and where Nolan has been across 2,000 years of continuous growth. Mark is technically a Viltrumite human hybrid, but Viltrumite genetics are so dominant that the hybrid part barely applies in practice. Nolan explains this to Mark during their confrontation in season 1. Viltrumite DNA is so aggressively dominant that a Viltrumite can breed with nearly any species of comparable biological development and produce offspring that are nearly pure Viltrumite in their physical makeup. Mark's human half contributes almost nothing to his physical capabilities. What it does contribute is significant. Emotional range, deep attachments, the capacity to love people outside his species in a way that Viltrumite conditioning actively worked to suppress. The show frames this as Mark's greatest edge in a fight. His anger when the people he loves are threatened unlocks output levels he can't reach when fighting without any personal stake. Showrunner Simon Raciapa confirmed this directly, saying that emotional state drives a meaningful portion of what a character can do in combat, and that there's always an extra 30 to 40% of capacity that unlocks under the right circumstances. For Mark, those circumstances are personal. He can't reach his full ceiling in a fight where he has nothing riding on it. He gets close when someone he loves is being hurt in front of him. This is why his fight performance tracks with what's happening to the people around him, rather than purely with his training. The Conquest fight in season 3 is the clearest example. Mark comes in drained from the Invincible War. His body has nothing left, and he still beats Conquest through sheer refusal to let go, driven by watching Eve almost die. The inner ear is the most well-known Viltrumite weakness and the one the GDA identifies and turns into a weapon over the course of the show. Flight depends on an extremely sensitive balancing system in the inner ear. That sensitivity works in both directions, a specific high-frequency sonic tone calibrated to the exact frequency that disrupts inner ear balance causes intense pain, disorientation, and loss of motor control in a Viltrumite. The frequency has to be precise. Loud noise on its own produces no effect. What matters is the specific pitch that the inner ear's flight system is tuned to. Cecil's kill switch is a device implanted near the inner ear that emits exactly that frequency on command. Robot later builds anti-Viltrumite drones from volcanic tempered titanium alloy cut at specific angles so that when struck, the armor produces a tone that causes the same inner ear disruption. His explanation of how it works is a clear statement of the principle. The harder you hit me, the more it will hurt you. The Viltrumite's own strength becomes the source of their pain. The GDA discovered this weakness through an accident. During a fight in Atlantis, a massive sea creature emitted a sonic scream that briefly stopped Mark in his tracks. The GDA observed this, recorded the frequency, and worked backward from it into their arsenal. Finding the exact frequency required first-hand observation of Viltrumite biology under specific conditions. And I took access to Mark's medical data from his time in GDA care to pin down the precise pitch. This is why the weakness, despite being documented, remains difficult for outside opponents to use without extensive prior research. The Scourge virus is the other major weakness. Engineered specifically to target Viltrumite DNA, the original strain killed 99.9% of the population. The mechanism is genetic. The virus attacks the DNA that the smart atom structure depends on, breaking down the biological framework that makes Viltrumite durability and healing possible. And survivors came out weakened, their strength and invulnerability temporarily reduced, leaving them vulnerable to attacks that would normally do nothing. Thetis created an improved second strain later described as capable of killing every surviving Viltrumite without exception if deployed. The Claxus plant is a third documented weakness, a naturally occurring organism whose compounds poison Viltrumites and progressively weaken them if untreated. This is a natural threat rather than a built weapon, but it establishes that Viltrumite biology has specific chemical weaknesses despite its general immunity to most diseases. And then there's the Ragnar, a species whose claws and fangs can actually cut through Viltrumite skin. They're among the very few naturally occurring creatures in the known universe capable of physically hurting a Viltrumite without specialized weaponry. Conquest carries the permanent marks from a Ragnar attack. His cybernetic arm exists because of that encounter. Nolan documented them in his book specifically because any species that can get through Viltrumite skin represents information worth keeping. The books he published on Earth under his author identity were full of coded intelligence about about everything he found that could hurt his own people. Nolan and Mark share the same biological framework. The difference between them in season 1 has nothing to do with different types of power. It's 2,000 years of reactive adaptation versus 4 years of development. Same foundation. Completely different state of construction. Nolan has survived conflicts that Mark hasn't reached yet. Every time Nolan came close to death and pulled back from the edge, his body rebuilt at a higher level. He's gone through that cycle hundreds of times across 20 centuries. The durability, strength, and speed he carries at the start of the series represent thousands of years of accumulated biological upgrades. Mark is at the beginning of that process. The show tracks his progression carefully, using specific fights to mark real leaps. The first conquest fight leaves Mark broken with both arms out of commission, winning through headbutts because he has no functional limbs. The rematch in season 4 sees him refuse to release a chokehold while his organs are being pulled out of his body. He wins in critical condition. He survives it. A version of Mark from season 1 survives neither outcome of that fight. Like, the biology that makes season 4 Mark possible came from everything that happened between those 2 points. Every serious fight is an upgrade. Every near-death experience raises his floor. The combat progression the show depicts tracks what biology says should happen to someone who keeps surviving things that should have killed them. There's also a gap beyond raw strength. Nolan spent 2,000 years developing combat intelligence. He knows how to read a fight, find openings, and pace himself across long engagements in ways Mark is still learning. During the Chicago confrontation, Nolan holds back considerably. He's trying to teach, trying to break Mark down mentally rather than physically end him. Even at reduced commitment, he takes Mark completely apart. A fully committed Nolan in season 1 ends Mark within seconds. The gap between them at that point in the story is that wide, and the show earns every inch of it, closing over the seasons that follow. What makes the eventual closing of that gap compelling is that it runs through the human side of Mark's biology. The emotional unlocking Raisiapa described, that extra 30 to 40% that comes out when someone he loves is in danger, is something Nolan's Viltrumite conditioning worked hard to remove. Nolan spent centuries being trained away from the attachments that bring out that reserve capacity. Mark never had that stripped out. The human half that adds nothing to his raw numbers turns out to be the thing that determines his ceiling when it matters most. The path of the series in the comics points toward Mark eventually reaching, and in specific moments surpassing, Nolan's output level. The fight with Thrag at the end of the run, where Mark holds his own against the strongest Viltrumite alive inside the core of a star, is the payoff of every single reactive adaptation cycle he went through from episode 1 forward. The biology is identical between them. The time separating them is everything. And the show's entire arc is watching that gap close, one brutal fight at a time across a story that was always really about what the biology means for who you choose to be inside it. If you like this video, consider subscribing for more Invincible breakdowns and analysis every week.